Thank you, Logan, for a good song selection this morning. Really a good lesson being taught through those songs. And thank you for being here with us this morning. I was just sitting there thinking before I got up, what a blessing it is to be able to be a part of a congregation where everybody loves each other. We're all striving for the same common goal. You can tell we want to be here. It's not like, oh, I'm going to go to church today. You know, we're here for a purpose. We're here for a reason to worship God and also interact with one another and encourage one another. And it's such a blessing to be a part of that. So thank you for being here and letting us, and a large part of that is due to you, really. The members of this church are wonderful people. We thank you for being here. As you'll recall, the board for this month is going to be based on men and godly men. We're going to talk about that this morning. Next week, we'll look at the role that men play in the church. We looked at the role that the women play in the church last month, and the song that Logan just sang speaks to that the men of this congregation must rise up. We must be energize this congregation in order for it to flourish as it should. And oftentimes we don't. Oftentimes we fall short of that. We're going to do some lessons that are going to encourage us to rise up and do more of that. This morning's lesson is starting that three-part series off, I suppose, if you want to look at it that way. The fourth final lesson, then we'll look at some other things regarding men and in regards to the family. Next week, I should say, is the family, and then after that will be the role of men in the church. But nevertheless, next three lessons will be based on godly men. And this morning, that lesson is going to be, this morning is our lesson as well, talking about what makes up a godly man. We're going to look at some characteristics of a godly man. And as I go through these lessons, and anybody that's ever brought a lesson knows that the person doing the preaching gets more out of it than most of the people in the audience. And this is certainly true in my case, because there's many, many areas in which I need to improve and I fail in, and we need to be encouraged to do better. We're going to look at those this morning. Micah chapter 6 and verse 8 is our text this morning. If you have your Bibles and would like to read along or follow along on the screen, read along with me. He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justly, love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. That verse talks about three things that we're going to look at this morning, but we're going to look at 7 in total of these characteristics of what God says a godly man is and what God says a godly man should strive to be. And that's certainly true. And as I said in that text, there were 3 of those 7 that we're going to look at this morning. Look at that text again. But to do justly, that's 1. To love mercy and to walk humbly. Those are the first 3 that we're going to notice this morning. And in particular, we'll have some others that we'll notice as well. But the first one of these characteristics of a godly man, he says, is to do justly. Look at that verse again with me, but if you have your Bibles and want to flip back a couple verses to try to get the context a little more of what Micah was speaking about here. Look, go back with me to verse 6. And look what Micah records here. Verse 6 says, with what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the high God? In other words, what does he want? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Remember back in those days, it was sacrificing animals to God as a sacrifice. Will the Lord be pleased with 1,000 rams or 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn of for my transgressions, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? No, what does God expect from me? I've sinned. So what does he want out of me? Maybe more money. Is that what it is? God didn't know. That's not the point. Look at verse 8. He has shown you. Micah says, he has shown you, oh man, what is good. God has shown each and every one of us what he needs out of us. He has shown you, oh man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. It's not about what I can give, what I can contribute, even though those things are great and are needed, but yet God's not looking for that. He would rather you be just in your actions. Actions speak louder than words. Is that true? Sure is, isn't it? Look at a couple of these other verses that go along with that idea. Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 3. To do righteous and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. Sacrifice is great. Giving to the Lord is wonderful. But what does really God want from us? He wants you to do the right thing. He wants you to live justly and righteously. That means more than anything else. Oh, but I give and I'm a very good giver. That's wonderful. But you know what? Actions speak louder than words. In other words, what I do with my life, how I'm living my life, means more to God than anything else. Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 16. Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean. Put away the evil of your doings from before my eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Rebuke the oppressor. Defend the fatherless. And plead for the widows. There you go. That's what he's saying. It's not about necessarily our sacrifices, but it's about living justly, doing the right thing, learning to do good, rebuking the oppressor. In other words, not allowing the oppressors to take a hold, but to defend the fatherless. In other words, living our lives according to God's will. That's what he wants from us. That's what he seeks from us. And men in particular, today we're looking at Psalm 106 and verse 3. Blessed are those who keep justice, and he who does righteously at all times. Do we sometimes fall into that trap? Where I do the right thing when it's seen. But there's times that I maybe don't always do that. He says he wants you to live, keep justice, and do the righteous thing. Do righteousness at all times. Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 1. My grandmother was, well, I always think of this every time I think of this verse. My grandmother was an old country girl from eastern Kentucky. And she, at that time, you went to buy meat at the store or coffee or whatever, and they would charge it to you by the pound. And they'd have a scale there, and she always said that the guy that used to sell them coffee had a fat thumb. He would hang that thumb on the scale and make it look like you were buying more than what you were. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 1 talks about that. Dishonest scales are an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. Get what you pay for, kind of a thing. Don't cheat somebody. Don't have that fat thumb hanging there on that scale and causing that coffee to look like you're buying more than really what you were getting. You see, living a just life is what God requires of us. Nothing special, but just everything that it requires. Isaiah 61 and verse 8. For I, the Lord, love justice, and I hate robbery. Those fat thumbs you see on the scales don't work for God. He hates that idea of stealing from somebody. Live your life justly. Do we? You see, that's one of the requirements of us men. If you consider yourself a godly man, and I look out in the audience today and I see a whole bunch of them, then you're a just person. If you say what you're going to give somebody, it comes out to be that. You don't try to cheat them. The second thing that we seen in our verse was that we are to love mercy. Do we love this idea of mercy or compassion? Every time I think about the definition of mercy, it's not really the best definition probably, but I remember as a kid in the schoolyard, we used to play a game called Mercy. And what it was is we would pile on somebody until they said, "Mercy! Get up off of me." In other words, stupid kids, right? Probably about the age of Christian, you know, and it would just pile them on until, okay, all right, I've had enough. Show me some mercy. Get up off of me. Well, do we love this idea of compassion and mercy for one another? Sometimes they didn't get up when you screamed mercy. They didn't show that mercy and compassion that they should have. They're like, all right already. Mercy, I said. You see, that's this idea of showing mercy to one another. Do we love that? God says we should. Luke chapter 6 and verse 35. Tough verse, isn't it? This is a toughie. But think about what he says. Love your enemies. Do good and lend, hoping for nothing in return. Wait a minute. Are we that kind of a person that we're merciful to people and I don't want anything back here? You need this, take it and go. And I don't want anything in return. Or do we give with this idea of, well, you know, back to remember when I helped you, you see, now I expect something from you in return. That's not mercy, is it? It's hoping nothing in return. And your reward will be great. And you will be the sons of the Most High. For he is kind to the unthankful and evil. Therefore, be merciful, just as your Father also is merciful. Think about that. God is merciful to those who are unthankful and evil. His mercy extends to them too. The bad people of this world, God's still merciful to them. The offer is extended to them, even though they're evil. God shows and knows what love, knows what mercy is all about. We have to learn that. Me as a man, I have to learn that. Matthew chapter 7 and chapter 5 and verse 7. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 14. Seeing that, this is one of my favorite verses. Think about this now. Read along with me and think about this. Seeing that we have a great high priest who passed through the heavens, that is Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses. Jesus knows what you're going through. No, how can you know? How can you know I'm going through that? Jesus knows what you're going through. But was in all points tempted as we, yet without sin. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in the time of need. God extends us mercy. Because why? Because Jesus knows what you've gone through. He knows what mercy is all about because he was there. It's as if Jesus pleads our case for us to God and says, have mercy on them. I've been there, done that. I went through that and endured that temptation. Show them mercy. What a wonderful thought that God would show us mercy when I don't really even deserve it. The song Logan sang to begin this morning's lesson, or the service, one of the powerful verse here. And it's one of those that I have trouble singing. because it kind of gets me right in the throat every time. Through the Lord's mercy, we are not consumed. It's because of God's mercy that we are what we are. We're even able to stand here and be here today. Because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. God's compassions never end. They continue. And just when you think they run out, he renews it again. And just when you think you don't have it, he renews it again. They're new every morning. Great is God's faithfulness. That's what he's speaking of. Great is your faithfulness. Psalm 25 and verse 6. Remember, O Lord, your tender mercies and your loving kindness, for they are from of old. They've been forever. From way back, God's mercies were extended. Great is your faithfulness, and your loving kindness are from of old. Just when you think God's mercy has run out, he fills it back up one more time. The third thing in our verse that we were looking at is we as men are called to walk humbly before God. Humble and humility. And I don't know whether this is just a man thing or not, but I don't really see this so much in women. But men often fall into the trap of arrogance and pride. We have a little bit of a swagger to us once in a while, and we're a little bit arrogant. Why is that? Well, it's because we haven't learned to walk humbly before God. We haven't learned to be the kind of man that God wants us to be. We haven't become the godly man that we think we should be, that God thinks we should be. Don't see that so much in women, and I don't know why exactly. Maybe it's a guy thing. I don't know. But it's true. 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 2 says, no one is like the Lord, for there is none besides him, nor is there any rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let no arrogance come from your mouth, for the Lord is the God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. Watch your mouth and don't talk with this arrogant, proud talk. Us guys have trouble with that once in a while, don't we? But godly men will work on it. Godly men will see that that's something that I need to change in my life, and I'll need to work on that. Are you? Romans chapter 12 and verse 3 says, for I say through the grace given to me, to everyone who's among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, as God dealt to each one a measure of faith. Have a little compassion for one another and walk humbly before your God, he says. You be careful that we don't puff ourselves up. You guys fall into that trap? We do. We must be careful that we don't fall into that trap. Proverbs 8 and verse 13. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil. Pride and arrogance are the evil way, and the perverse mouth I hate. Word perverse we don't use often. I've never used the word perverse in my conversations with anybody, but it's this idea of turning away from what's right. In other words, I'm not saying the things that are right. I am arrogant in my ways. I'm evil in my way with my mouth. Be careful that we don't fall into these traps as a godly man. Well, the fourth one we're going to look at this morning is a godly man is a generous man. Have you ever known someone? I have seen this with my own eyes. When there was a need It actually happened in my own family, not this family, but my family. There was a need in the family, and the person that I knew had the ability to help just kind of avoided it. Well, boy, I've got to go. Time's ticking, and I need to be going, and would not help in those times. You see, a godly man is one who is generous. Look at a couple passages along that line. In Proverbs chapter 19, whistling with me, right? Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 17. He who has pity on the poor lends to the Lord, and he will pay them back as he has given. When I am generous with those, who am I actually helping? I'm doing the Lord's work. I'm helping the Lord when I help those that are poor. When I am generous. You see, that's a godly man for you. That's a godly man who's willing to say, don't want anything in return. Here's some help. Let's go take care of what we need to take care of. We are lending to God. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 17. But whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? It don't. It can't. And it won't, because we are not generous. Godly men are generous men and are willing to step up when the time calls. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 19. We're familiar with this verse, but I want to look at verse 21 in particular. But I'll start in verse 19. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and rust nor destroy, and the thieves do not break in and steal. But here's verse 21. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Is that true? Absolutely. When I see those that are in need and I'm not willing to help, that says something about my heart, doesn't it? It says something about where my treasures are in my heart. They are within my stuff. And it's mine, not yours. And you keep your multi little fingers off of my stuff. You see, that's the attitude that he's trying to get us to break away from, and trying to get us to see that we need to have our treasures in our heart. Where our treasures are, that's where our heart will be also. Number 5, a godly man is an honest man. One that is willing to, even if it hurts him, to do the right thing. I grew up in the trucking industry, as Clarence knows, and my dad was a truck driver. They worked on trucks. And I seen both sides of this fence many, many times. Those that were dishonest, and you can just tell, as soon as it was happening, you could see it. As a kid, I could see it happening. And then I've seen on the other side of that where men were upright, honest, and you could tell they were doing the right thing. They would go out of their way to do the right thing and to be honest with one another. Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 22. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who dealt truthfully are his delight. That's the idea of a godly man. 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 21. For we aim at what is honorable, not only in the Lord's sight, but also in the sight of man. You see, we shouldn't also only want to be honest to please God. I should want to be honest to please you and to all man. That makes us and shows to the world that you are godly. You're at least trying in this way to be a godly man. How are we doing with this? Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 3. The integrity of the upright will guide them. That's another word that we don't use a lot. We should. Integrity. Where's that word today in our vocabulary? It has been gone, isn't it? It's moral soundness and uprightness, or the condition of being complete or undivided or unbroken. In other words, you got your stuff together. You are a sound man when they call you a man of integrity. You are somebody that they can trust. James chapter 1 and verse 8 shows us the opposite of that. He's a double-minded man, unstable in his ways. That's somebody who has not got their act together, do they? They're not acting with integrity. They are unstable. We've met people like that, haven't we? Maybe I've been that way before. You see, unstable, double-minded. We call them two-faced. They say one thing and then do something else. Unstable in their ways. Number 6, well, this is a biggie, especially for us guys, is a godly man is a man who is teachable, who is willing to listen. One of the hardest things to do as a preacher is to talk to somebody and try to convince them that the life that they're living is wrong, and to see that look on their face of, yeah, I just don't get it. Or, thanks for trying, but I'm going to do my own thing. To be teachable, to be able to listen to instruction is such a wonderful trait. And folks, it's a godly trait. If you're a man and you're not teachable, you won't listen to a thing anybody says. Known people like that? Yeah, me too. That are just their own way. They live in their own little world. They kind of walk around in their own little bubble, and nobody can penetrate their minds. That's not a godly man. Proverbs chapter 15, verse 32. He who disdains instruction despises his own soul. He who heeds rebuke gets understanding. The fear of the Lord is the instruction of wisdom, and before honor is humility. Disdain instruction, you despise your own soul. 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 19, do not quench the spirit. You ever had that happen? Yeah, where you're on fire, but at the same time, something comes along and quenches that. Do not despise prophecies. Test all things. So it's good to look things through, test them, but hold fast to what's good. In other words, we should weigh out what's right and wrong. You shouldn't just take my word for it. Test it. Prove what I'm saying to be true, but when you find that to be true, hang on to it and be a part of what God wants us to be. Abstain from every form of evil. That's what a godly man does. A godly man is teachable. Psalm chapter 25 and verse 4. Listen to the prayer of David. Show me your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me in your truth and teach me. For you are the God of my salvation, and on you I wait all the day long. Have we ever prayed that prayer? Help me, God, to know what's right. Teach me. Guys have trouble with that, don't we? Godly men don't, though. They understand that I need to learn God's way. I need God's instructions. Isaiah 30 and verse 9. For whatever reason, guys are that way. We think we got this figured out. we're fixers. My job is to fix stuff. And so I don't need any help. How many of us, when we get something new, we open the box, the instructions, whoosh, throw them away. We don't need that. I got this figured out. We do the same thing spiritually. I don't need God. I don't need this Bible. Shoot, I got this figured out. Isaiah 30 and verse 9. That is a rebellious people. This is a rebellious people. Lying children who will not hear the law of the Lord. Is that you? Be a teachable man and woman, as far as that goes. Teachable is something, a godly trait that we all must adopt. Number 7, finally this morning, I'll let you go, is a godly man is a responsible man. One that recognizes that this life I live isn't all about me. I have responsibilities. I have requirements of me. If I have a family, I have a requirement to prepare and to take care of that family. I have a responsibility to my spiritual life as well. And a godly man knows that. Romans chapter 14 and verse 11. For it is written, as I live, say the Lord. Every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall confess to God. And so let each of us shall give an account of himself to God. I am responsible for my actions. A godly man knows that and prepares for it. He lives his life in such a way that he lives it responsibly, in such a way that he doesn't live his life according to what he wants to do. He knows that there is a way to follow. And he knows that there's going to come a day when he's going to bow his knee before God. So therefore, he lives his life in a responsible way. Are there many men that live today irresponsible? Sad but true. Was me at one time. Ezekiel chapter 18 and verse 20. The soul who sins shall die. The responsibility of my sin is on who? Me. The son shall not bear the guilt of the father, nor the father the guilt of the son. I have a responsibility to live my life according to God's will and to God's way. That's my responsibility. Oftentimes we fall short. 1 Timothy 5 and verse 8. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. We have responsibilities, and a godly man knows that. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 10. A godly man knows this also, that we will all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive the things done in the body according to what he has done, whether good or bad. Responsible men, godly men are responsible. And they recognize the fact that spiritually, I must live my life in such a way that when I stand before that judgment seat of God, God will look down upon me favorably and say, we're going to show you mercy. We're going to show you grace because of the life you lived. Responsibility is a big key to being a godly man. Godly men are just, they're merciful, and they're humble. They're also generous and honest, and they're teachable, and they are responsible. I hope this lesson's been beneficial to you. And as I said, next week we're going to look at the role that the man plays in the family. And that could be a whole week's long worth of series on that. But it is so important for us as men to get it. But you know what? What's also important is for younger men to get this too. Understand what my responsibilities are as a godly man, and to learn that now, so that when you're an old geezer like me, you don't have to then say, oops, I've messed up 50 years of my life. Now what am I going to do? You see, that's what we'll talk about more next week. I hope these lessons are beneficial to you. And you ladies are getting something from this also. These are the kind of men you should look to and look for in a husband. But often we get clouded, don't we, because of a whole host of things. And we choose, I told you this once before. My dad used to say that one of my sisters in particular was a jerk magnet. He said, if there's a bad guy within 50 miles, she'll find him and drag him home. You know, women are that way sometimes. They don't look for godly men. Why would you not? Well, a lot of things pull us away from that, don't we? You see, these are the characteristics and the qualities that we should be looking for in men, in ourselves and in those that we might want to be with. If you're here this morning and you're not a godly man or a godly woman, and you will need to respond and make your life right with God, we want to give you that opportunity to do so this morning. Maybe you're a godly man and you've fallen away and you see some shortcomings in your life and some things in your life that we should change. And you need some help in that regard. Let us help you. Let us help you become the godly man that you should be. Together as we stand and sing.